Welcome to another episode of Come Together. And we're live. Another episode. Scott, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
So, I came across your website and your content, all your awesome work, after I was looking for similar guests to Dennis McNally, who I was so happy to hear from, the author of the Grateful Dead, the definitive Grateful Dead biography, and I not only do I love music, I love learning about it and diving down rabbit holes and going into deep dives. When I saw the books, not only just the books that you wrote, the amount of books, but also the diversity of topics and genres that you kind of dive into, I knew I wanted to introduce myself and see if we can make something happen. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
So you write about everything music, and it seems to be. Have you always been a musician? Did you always have some kind of affinity or passion for the storytelling or the history, or how'd that happen?
Yeah, I've always been drawn to music. My father was in the music business.
Hmm.
And though I've lived in Los Angeles now for more than 25 years, I grew up in Nashville and, also known as Music City, USA.
That's right.
And my dad, being in the music industry, obviously exposed me to a lot of music from the time I was young. And, I think when we're kids, we just kind of get interested in what our parents are interested in because that's the sort of scope of our world.
Hmm.
And so I got interested in some of the music. My dad was a songwriter before he got into the business side of music, and so I got kind of interested in like some country artists that he was writing for, like Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty. And I remember even like as a 6-year-old, I made a cassette tape of me talking to Conway Twitty, which I mailed to his, fan club or whatever. Like,
I love
I was just interested in that because my dad was.
it.
But then as I got older, I really, as I think a lot of kids in Nashville, I gravitated away from country music because, it's sort of like then you get into the phase where you sort of kick against, whatever your parents are into.
Sure.
Um, but then I started getting into like classic rock and stuff and like Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And I started looking through my dad's record collection and he's got all that stuff too. Um, so he kind of turned me on to a lot of like classic rock and I got into all kinds of music from there, and then kind of came back around to country as well, as an adult. Um, but basically, I think the seed of it is just that my dad kind of modeled a love for music, and when I was a kid, he would like quiz me when stuff would come on the radio. He'd be like, "Who's this artist?
Sure.
Who wrote this song? Who played bass, on this song?" So I probably just couldn't help but pursue it because I always not only loved like the sound of music and the way that music moves you, but I was also fascinated by like the trivia, and I
Hmm.
think a lot of um, the way a lot of maybe fathers and sons would trade like sports statistics. My dad
Sure.
and I were trading music statistics. So yeah, I think it was bound to be.
That's super cool. I love that. I love that. I have a lot. I think I was talking I was on someone's show the other day, and they were asking me about as far as me. They're asking another question in terms of I have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, and
Yeah.
they're asking me about what if they like X, Y, and Z particular lifestyle that you're pursuing or not, and how would you feel? And I was like, you know what? Maybe they'll do it, maybe they won't. But like when you're like enthusiastic and passionate, like your kids, like you can't fake that to your kids, and it's magnetic to them. It's electrifying. And I mean
Yeah.
that's my dad loves music, and he never had any kind of professional relationship to it, obviously. But he I grew up. I have so strongly associated like James Taylor and Carole King while we're driving, picking me up from camp, or Billy Joel at the Garden, when I was 5 or 6 years old, and
Yeah.
and learning And then, like you said, playing trivia in the car with, my dad would put on Bat Out of Hell, while he was driving to Manhattan, and I'd have to be like, oh, this is Meatloaf, right? And and I learned from him.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's
that's
funny.
re-
I host this podcast called Songcraft, and my co-host Paul has two young daughters that are like 11 and 7 or somewhere in there, and they're obsessed with like Kiss and
there you
Pearl
go.
Jam and like everything that he kind of grew up on because he has completely exposed them to that. And he's like, on the one hand, I'm thrilled to see that my kids are excited about this music, but I'm also ruining them because they're going to have nothing in common with their peers.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually funny that you say that. I've been because I teach high school English part-time, and I already have a quote unquote old enough soul, to for my own contemporaries. But my students, it's funny. I'm like, I showed them The Blind Side last year, and they're like, I never heard this movie. Oh, you
Uh,
did it come out? I'm like 2008. They're like, we were born 2008. I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
yeah,
But
it's
um,
depressing.
but I've been, but I was, so I'm trying to expose them to some Dylan, some Springsteen, some of the Dead,
Yeah.
some good music, and try to pay attention to the lyrics because I teach an English class, and um, I think the biggest pushback that I have with them is that it's not familiar to their ear, and it's like, and once they kind of like get a little more familiar, and once it doesn't become such a foreign sound to them, they notice a lot more detail, as they're more exposed to it, and so I'm sure that has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think so. And I think that, we've lost this kind of monoculture that I grew up in where there was, 3 to 5 television channels and that was it. And there
Yeah.
was, like a handful of radio stations and everybody kind of experienced the same pop culture. And that has been like splintered so much to where
Yeah.
kids, they don't identify, I think with some of, the experiences that we had, but I do believe that the cream rises to the top and
Yeah.
music, when I was a teenager, I was listening to, the Beatles who broke up long before I was born. And, I gravitated toward music that was from a prior era in addition to music from my own era.
Yeah.
And so, um, I think on the one hand, we can sort of lament the change that has happened, but on the other hand, music is more accessible than ever. So,
Hmm.
when you talk about Springsteen or Dylan or whatever, these kids actually have a way to go access that immediately,
Sure.
and hopefully experience it and discover it. Whereas when I was a kid, if somebody said something was good, I had to go spend $15 for a CD to find out. You
Yeah.
know, um, and so I do think there's an upside to like as long as people are exposing them to this stuff or championing it, then they can actually go experience it. And because the cream rises to the top, I think the good stuff will endure. So I think it's going to be harder for people to, be exposed to things than it used to be. But at least when they are,
You
they've
get a
got a
deep
treasure
cut.
trove to dig into.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's so funny you put it like that because I tend the way that I consume music is I tend to get very invested in an artist and learn all their songs. I love listening to albums all the way through and um, really becoming familiar. And then what'll usually happen is they'll cover a song. I'll see on the credits that it's a cover, and I'll kind of check out who that original song and where that kind of goes. And that's been such a fun way to learn
Yeah,
about more music and new music. But B, like you said, like I'm listening to Springsteen. I get to check out. I could tell you if you showed me a set list, I'll tell you what year that concert was. Like I at this point I was able to do these deep dives, and the same thing. It's similar with Dylan probably, and similar with a lot of other artists that I've really spent a lot of time on. Um, it's really cool to have this archive. I think that the Dead and Springsteen and Dylan and I mean I don't know who was really recording so much as they were at the
yeah,
time, but that allowed people to kind of live vicariously through the eyes of these real fans and real junkies, and
yeah,
really get to participate in it.
yeah. Well, good luck listening to everything the Grateful Dead ever put on tape. That'll be the rest of your life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And all the subsequent bands and all the subsequent music. Yeah, definitely. What do you think about the state of music today? What's some music that's kind of catching your eye and drawing your attention now?
Man, I gotta say, I was literally having a conversation with someone yesterday, and I said, if someone asks me what kind of music do you like, I think the best answer I can give is 20th century music. Uh,
Okay.
in that, it was the music of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, I'm a child of the grunge era, you
Uh-huh.
know.
Sure.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that is the stuff that really like I connected with. And so, if you ask me like who I like that's current, like it tends to be people that are rooted in kind of some
Right.
of that aesthetic of the past. So like Bruno Mars or Nathaniel Rateliff
Yeah.
or Lake Street Dive. I really like Brandy Carlisle a lot. But these are all artists that, in some ways, are very much kind of share those same roots
Sure.
of 20th century music. Um, so I'm kind of the worst about staying up on like what's the. I'm a Grammy voter, and I submitted my votes last night, and in the category of Best New Artist, I literally had to go to Spotify and pull up each of the artists in the running and spend some time listening because I literally was not familiar with a single one of them by name. So
Wow.
I'm, it's probably fitting that I'm a music historian. I kind of live in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel a very similar way. But but it's exciting to see what new people are doing with these older genres,
Yeah,
and I mean, I think that and I've been right now I'm in the middle of a Billy Strings deep dive,
yeah,
and I'm really fascinated because it's one of the things that I enjoy so much is that listening to any of his given shows is a music class in and of itself, and that I'm getting connected to old country or western tunes that I never have, like a whole world I've never been a part of before. So
yeah,
like this, so he's kind of like a segue into the past, but he's like firmly now, which is cool, and his use of electric in the middle of his jams, I think has been really fascinating in order, just to
yeah.
come to
Yeah, I
terms
mean,
with.
he's incredibly talented. You got guys like Jesse Wells kind of coming out of,
Yeah. What's
nowhere
his
that,
story? He's so cool.
yeah, I mean, just like he's almost like Bob Dylan in that it's like the faucet is just on and songs are just flowing out of him and he like can't turn it off,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which I think is super interesting. So I think he's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I'm a grumpy fan of music of the past, but at the same time, I see these people emerging that, are incredibly talented. So,
Sure. Yeah.
it's encouraging.
It's fun. It's definitely a lot of fun for me. Can you want to tell me a little bit about, so we have a bunch of different topics, I guess, or sections that we can go down. I would love to learn about the Southbound and Southern music because that was really the Southern music was kind of the intersection I took between like rock and the jam music. I guess by introduction through the Marshall Tucker Band or the Allman Brothers, and then Derek
Yeah.
Trucks, and Tedeschi Trucks, um, and you could tell that like there's when you hear listen to different genres, there's a style and a history and like a sound and a whole feel. Can you want to elaborate on the some of the history maybe?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's kind of funny. So, Southbound, which the full title is Southbound: An Illustrated History of Southern Rock, that was the first book that I wrote. And what's interesting about that is that I had sort of fallen into writing some liner notes or album notes, which is a lost art, but still exists, believe it or not, for some historical reissues of some various artists. And I hadn't actually written a full length book, but I knew I had a book in me, and it was not Southern rock. Um, but I had been kind of working on this book that, by the way, I'm still writing.
Okay.
I've written 7 books
Beautiful.
since, um, but but I do have a deal for it now, so I have a deadline, so it's actually gonna be
That's
done. But
encouraging, right? It
um,
helps.
yeah, but I got this call out of the blue from an editor in New York, and he says, "Hey, uh, we want to publish a book about the history of Southern rock, and we hear that you're the guy to do it." And in my mind, I thought, "What? Why?" But I had enough sense in the moment to go, "Okay, tell me more," you know. And so he says, "Yeah, we want to write this book. It's like an overview of the history of Southern rock. It's gonna have a lot of photos. We want a lot of deep text." And and I'm like, "Okay, interesting. I'm interested." So then I get off the phone, and my friend Randy Poe calls me, and Randy had written a biography of Dwayne Allman amongst multiple other books,
Nice.
and it was published by this same publisher. And so Randy calls me. He goes, "Hey, you're going to be getting a call from my publisher because they called me and asked me if I wanted to write a book about Southern rock, and I told them no, that you're the guy to do it."
Oh,
And I'm like,
nice.
"Oh," I'm like, "Well, he already called me." He's like, "What? I got off the phone with him like 10 minutes ago." Um, he's like, "What did you say?" And I said, "Well, I said, I'd be interested." And he goes, "Look, I'm going to give you some advice. I know you have your passion project book. The easiest way to get a book published is to have had a book published.
Yes.
So take a year or so out of your life, write this book, and then you're a published author, and everything's going to be a lot easier for you going forward." Which was a huge, helping hand
You're
for
the
him
third
to do that.
person in a week to tell me this, by the way. You're the
Yeah,
writer that I've spoken to
that's
that said the
funny.
same thing, that they didn't start with the passion project. They had a passion project in mind. Someone told them get X, Y, and Z done for for commercial
Yep.
purposes or to get that title, and then and move on. And
Yeah.
it's so funny that that sentiment is so popular.
Yeah. I mean, he was absolutely right. And I mean, the good news is I grew up in Nashville, like I said, and I grew up exposed to a lot of Southern rock, and I liked Southern rock. So it wasn't like, if somebody had called me and was like, "Hey, we're looking for someone to write a book on pirate sea shanties of the 1500s," I'd be like, "I have no idea where to begin. So at least it was something that I actually was interested in, and it kind of saw as an opportunity to learn more about. So
Yeah.
I kind of just dove in headfirst as a student of it, and I learned a lot from the process of writing that. But I
What was
knew
your
that.
research like?
What's that?
How'd you research? What was your research process? How'd you go about it?
Well, I basically just got all the books I could about the Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner, and started reading a bunch of articles, and just deep diving, finding a lot of articles from the time,
Uh-huh.
whether it be Rolling Stone or whatever, interviews with these bands, and just started pulling it all together. Then I, interviewed some of the players themselves, and just started kind of trying to wrap my brain around how I was going to tell this story.
Right.
But the thing that stood out to me, and it still kind of stays with me, is Southern rockers, like in the 70s, were kind of considered like narrow-minded rednecks by everybody outside the South,
Okay.
and everybody in the South considered them wild, long-haired rock and rollers who
Yeah.
weren't like good Southern boys. So they were kind of like
Misfits
people without
everywhere.
a home, you
Yeah.
know? So it's like they were kind of rebellious to everyone, which
Right.
is sort of the spirit of rock and roll. What I really came away with was that all rock was Southern rock in the beginning. If you look at, Elvis is from, Mississippi, and Buddy Holly is from Texas, and Little Richard is from Georgia, Fats
Yeah.
Domino is from Louisiana. Like you look at every architect of rock and roll, they're literally all Southern.
Yeah.
And then once you have the Beatles come, and then there's this whole shift, and you get into the whole like psychedelic movement, um, and then that all got kind of bloated, and then you have
Yeah.
like the band with Robbie Robertson come along, and everything kind of gets back to like rootsiness. That's what kind of opened the door, I think, for Southern rock to return, because suddenly everybody's kind of interested in this sort of earthiness and rootsiness that's different
Yeah.
from the whole kind of like psychedelic movement. So that's when you see the Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner kind of rise to the fore. And,
It was
those were,
associated with the band's success.
what's that?
So I guess their revival was associated with the band's success. The band kind of brought the
I,
field back.
I think the band were the ones who like sort of opened the door to make. I mean, they were a bunch of Canadians except for Levon Helm, who's from
Yeah,
Arkansas, but they opened the door for that sort of appeal to the bands over here doing songs like "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down" and "Cripple
yeah,
Creek," and like these are Southern rooted songs, and
yeah.
so I would say they and Creedence Clearwater Revival, who were from Northern California, even though people thought they were from the Bayou of Louisiana,
Sure.
like they kind of opened the
Kind of
door for
passed
the.
themselves along that way.
Exactly, yeah, and very credibly, they did it very well. But those bands I think opened the door for like true Southern bands, and the Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner are not particularly similar in their sounds, but two fantastic rock bands, and there's so many others. Marshall Tucker Band that you mentioned earlier, and Wet Willie, and all these great Southern rock bands. So yeah, that was a lot of fun for me, and it's amazing how many connection points there are. I just finished writing a book that I turned in this week about soul music,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
it's
it's nice.
it's like wild how many like soul figures behind the scenes in soul music were the same figures behind the scenes in Southern rock. Like
Really?
all this stuff is kind of connected. It's pretty wild.
What? Can you elaborate on that a little bit without giving away your book?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, so the Allman Brothers basically formed from Dwayne Allman and Barry Oakley and
Yeah.
J-Mo jamming at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals.
Hmm.
And Dwayne is down there playing guitar on studio sessions for, Wilson Pickett, and convinces Wilson Pickett to record
Ah,
Hey Jude. And his guitar solo at the end of Hey Jude is kind of considered the birth of Southern rock in a lot of ways. But then Aretha Franklin goes up to New York and wants these Muscle Shoals guys to come up and be the backing band, and Dwayne is there. You look at pictures of Aretha's sessions, where she's, recording some of her classic hits, and you see Dwayne Allman in the background, you
yeah.
know. But like Phil Walden, who was the head of Capricorn Records, which was the Allman Brothers label, he was previously Otis Redding's manager.
There you go.
And, a lot
Amazing.
of soul artist managers. And you guys got guys like Rick Hall and Muscle Shoals who are producing, these great classic soul records with Etta James and Wilson
Yeah.
Pickett and Aretha, but then at the same time, he's like had a management contract on Dwayne Allman initially, like so it's just interesting how you see the overlap that like you start getting into like gospel music, country music, blues, rock and roll, soul, and you start seeing some of these same people
Yeah.
crop up, and you're like, oh, there's connectivity, amongst all of it.
It's so amazing. It's so amazing. And it's so cool that you're doing that because these genres are so much fun and you could spend a lifetime in literally each one of them. I mean, it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
crazy and like such explosive creativity all at one point, just like everywhere, just all over the place was just
yeah,
it was so incredible.
yeah.
What was it like when you were by the way, what was the context? How old are you at this point while you're doing this first book? And what was it like meeting some of these while you're doing research, meeting some of these stars and meeting some of these incredible musicians that I'm sure you looked up to or known about forever?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. I remember interviewing Billy Gibbons because there's a ZZ Top chapter in the Southern Rock book, and thinking like, when I was a kid, ZZ Top was on MTV with like, Legs and, Sharp Dressed Man. And, these guys were like living cartoon characters, to a kid.
Hmm.
And I remember like talking to Billy Gibbons on the phone, and people would always talk about like, man, Billy Gibbons is like so full of it. Like he's such a mythologizer, like, you know, and I'm like, he wasn't like that with me. And then when I started thinking about our conversation, I'm like, wait, of course he was. There's no way some of this stuff was true, you know. But then also like embracing that of like that's the point, He's like a larger than life carnival barker. Like that's what's great about him. Like that's why he's cool, Like he's just a self mythologizer, And but then I also realized like, oh, I could probably be a better interviewer. Like instead of just accepting, everything that somebody tells me. So I feel like I kind of learned, how to interview people by interviewing people.
Yeah.
Um, and, I've had ones that have gone exceptionally well, and I've had ones that have gone not great. But I feel like I learn a little something, every time. And especially with my podcast, we've interviewed almost 300 people, and I feel like I get more comfortable with it,
Sure, sure.
each time. But I think I really had to learn. Like, I used to research people and then go interview them and ask them about a bunch of stuff that I'd already researched, and I had to learn that, like, I should probably ask them about something that you know I haven't seen them talk about before, because
Sure.
why do I need to go mine the same,
Story.
material?
Yeah.
Um, so I try to, like, when I interview people now, I try to, like, let them know early on that, I have done my homework, because I think people appreciate that.
Sure.
And let them know that I do know what I'm talking about. And then also feel the freedom to kind of let it go where it goes. Because I used to be like, well, no, I have these 15 questions. I got to get these questions asked. And when I'm a little less uptight about it and I just let it, like, go where it goes, I wind up finding out stuff that I maybe never would have stumbled on otherwise. So it's kind of
Sure.
getting out of my own way a little bit. But Southbound was, I mean, I wrote that book in 2013 and 2014. So I didn't, like, begin my career as an author. Like, I've only been doing this for, better, like, a little more than a decade. So
Nice.
um, I learned a lot doing that book in terms of how and I had interviewed people before for album notes and things that I had written for essays and articles and stuff. But that was when it was, like, very concentrated, one big project. I really got to focus and, like, get a lot of voices in here. And so, yeah, it's like being thrown into the deep end of the pool and figuring out how to swim.
Yeah. But sometimes, I mean, sometimes that's the way you got to do it,
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm finding that to be exceptionally true with my own experiences, and like what you said about, I mean, I started doing podcasts a year and a half ago, and it's all relatively new to me, but it's funny that you say that the bullet points or the list of questions, because I usually give my guests the choice. I say I could send you a list of bullet points of things that I'd like to get to. I was like, however, I don't want to be married to a script, and a lot of times the conversation just kind of flows best when you let it breathe and everyone just gets to do their own thing. So,
Yeah.
so I was like, if you want a general gist, here's a couple of big points I want to get to, but overall, um, it's really, really amazing about I'm particularly excited by the connection between soul and Southern rock. I have to look into that because
Yeah.
I didn't think that I wouldn't have I would have dreamt that there's probably more, like, the famous Jerry Garcia playing on the opening of Teach Children, playing Slide, on Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, and I knew that whole, like, scene, the San Francisco or Laurel Canyon scene, everyone was always very, popping in with one another. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it extended across genres, across the country like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the guys who played on, the Aretha Franklin stuff that she cut. Well, she really only cut one complete song in Muscle Shoals at Fame Studios, but those guys wound up going and launching their own studio called Muscle Shoals Sound, and it's like they recorded the earliest Leonard Skinner recordings. They also recorded the Rolling Stones came through there and recorded Brown Sugar and
Right.
Wild Horses. And they had to cut about 3 songs in that studio. Well, then those guys cut the staple singers, like I'll Take You There, Respect Yourself. These are the same group of people that are playing on these records, producing these records at their studio. But there's really a interesting, like, social component to all this, in that the music industry was, primarily white in terms of leadership, in terms of executives at record labels,
Sure.
studio owners, that sort of thing. And yet you had a phenomenal number of black artists who
Black
were,
music.
making them all this money, having
Yeah.
these hits. And when Martin Luther King died, there was such a sense of a shift. Um, a lot of hope was lost,
Yeah.
and a lot of black artists and a small handful of people in the black industry started looking around and going, why aren't there more black producers? Why aren't there
Mhm.
more black radio programmers? Why aren't there
Yeah.
more black executives?
Yeah.
And there was really this tidal wave that began of we got to realign some things. And it was largely, King's assassination that I think brought everything into sharp focus that, it's time to quit waiting around for things to change. We got to change them.
There you go.
And,
Yeah.
a lot of um, white producers and executives were suddenly kind of cast as the villains, and and seen as having been exploiting some of these artists. And in some cases that was true, and in other cases I think some people were sort of unfairly characterized.
Right.
Um, and but for I think the net of that whole movement was a good thing, that there was more, you saw more black ownership, you saw more black entrepreneurship, you saw more black participation in these bigger companies that had
Mhm.
basically not had black A&R men or black producers or whatever. And
Yeah.
I say A&R men, it was all men, still incredibly sexist at the
Yeah.
time, and probably still is. But that's when you see guys like Rick Hall, who owned Fame Studios. You see guys like Phil Walden, who had been Otis Redding's manager. That's when they start looking at groups. They start looking at people like Dwayne Allman and going, "Well, what's our future?"
Hmm.
And so that's what's really interesting is you see a lot of the industry people sort of glom onto the Southern rock thing because here's something that's rising, and we've kind of lost our standing in the world of
Oh,
black music. So
I
it's a
see.
super interesting kind of social study in terms of all those connections and then how they kind of splintered and then took time in some cases to rebuild trust, and in some cases the trust was not rebuilt, and in some cases it probably shouldn't have been because there was some exploitative stuff going on. So it's all from a and I don't get too off into all that, in my writing about Southern rock, but it's in the backdrop and it's super interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know about that. I remember, I don't remember where I read it, but I remember reading that right after after Martin Luther King Jr. was shot, um, James Brown, someone, I forgot who it was, maybe the government or maybe someone pretty significant in society called James Brown and said, I need you to make sure that the black community does not explode into riots." And he's like, I don't know what, like I know you have a big show. I think he had a big show that night. You had a big concert, and everyone was just getting the news, and they were telling him like you can either stir things up or you could, calm things down. And they were pleading with him to calm things down. And I don't even remember what James Brown's response was, but just like I think everyone knew that like listen, whoever was the leadership in the quote unquote record studio is one thing, but like the people creating the music and the sound, like everyone, all the great white music of the 60s and 70s came from, or a majority of it came from black music,
Yeah,
and I think people knew that. I think there was that as a society, I think that people, recognize that, this is really where everything comes from.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was right after King was killed that James Brown was supposed to be giving a concert, and I think it was in uh, I want to say Cleveland, um, or maybe it was Boston. It
Oh,
was
I think it's
Boston.
Boston. I
Yeah,
think it's
it
Boston.
was Boston. Yeah,
Yes, 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 yes.
um,
In
yeah, and
68, yes.
so he had this concert scheduled, and uh, basically they were worried about, well, should we get, I mean, there had been these sort of uprisings in all of these major US cities,
Yeah.
and they were like, do we need to bring a bunch of people downtown into Boston and potentially risk having a problem, and um, basically they decided, okay, let's have James Brown go forward with the concert and let's put it on TV and encourage some people to stay home and watch it and some people to come. And
Ah,
like it was essentially like there was literally like one black councilman, and he was like, if you cancel this concert, you're gonna bring all of these people who are already like feeling
getting
this
ready to
sense of
go. Yeah.
outrage,
Yeah.
and then they're gonna show up and there'll be a concert's canceled. Like you're creating a powder keg. And so James Brown did perform, and he did kind of make an appeal to like, hey, let's like let cooler heads prevail, and we're not going to answer violence with violence, and it is considered a kind of a pivotal, important moment in the aftermath, so that Boston did not experience the
Yeah.
upheaval that other cities did, and even at one point, like a bunch of people did kind of like rush the stage and get on the stage and were kind of dancing and stuff, and the police start moving in, and you see James Brown. There's video of this. You see James Brown like telling the cops to back off. It's pretty bold when you're like one
Yeah.
dude on stage and you got a bunch of fans like that are
Especially
getting up
then.
and getting rowdy. And he
Yeah.
basically like calms the whole thing down. It's like, go back to your seats, like you're embarrassing yourselves, like and he basically like intervenes and keeps the cops from probably creating a worse situation. So yeah, it's an interesting, and James Brown's a completely interesting study because he's all about sort of like self-determination, but also was like kind of conservative. He's a Nixon supporter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's he's an interesting sort of mix, of conservative politics, but also very much pushing for equality for Black Americans. The lines aren't always so neat with this stuff. You sort of wind up with these complex
Especially with
figures where you're like,
creatives.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. James Brown is another guy that I have not yet gone deep enough into.
yeah,
Um, but and was Sam Cooke killed earlier than this or around this point in time? When was he killed? And I mean, we
yeah.
could talk. I'd love to talk about why that was so significant. And how significant he was. If you want to elaborate on
Yeah.
that at all.
I mean, Sam Cooke was, when you talk about soul music, Sam Cooke might have been the reason that soul music even ever existed as a concept. You could argue that it was Ray Charles or Sam Cooke, but Sam died in December of 1964.
Okay, a couple
Um,
years earlier.
and that was like a huge loss. The thing that's unique about soul music, as compared to R&B, is that R&B music was, of the 40s and 50s, was very much kind of like this sort of upbeat, dancey music. It's what like white artists basically took and turned into rock and roll.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and
why I like
then
it.
yeah, right. And soul emerged in the 19 late 1950s, early 1960s, and it really came directly out of the black church. And where a lot of like R&B artists like Little Richard or whoever,
Mhm.
like their music was not like the music of the church. But you have Ray Charles come and literally take gospel songs that
Sure.
were part of the church tradition and change the lyrics and
The
make them
organ
love
was
songs,
big. I
you
love the
know. Yeah,
organ from that too.
yeah, yeah, and use the organ and use that style of singing. It comes right out of the church. Well, Sam Cooke, Ray Charles had church in his background, but Sam Cooke was a member of the Soul Stirrers, which was basically the most popular gospel group of the day. And his voice was so distinctive. And women were like losing their minds over this guy. Like he was way too smooth and way too sexy. I think
Yeah.
he was arousing far too much passion that was more of the carnal side than the spiritual side. That's why I say he might be responsible for the birth of soul music. Because when he started, I think, when he left gospel music and went into secular music, he already had this huge fan base from the gospel world that he kind of brought with him.
Yeah.
And, he was already like a rock star in the gospel world. But then, he really became kind of a pop singer. I mean, like You Send Me and, that's don't know much about history. Like all that stuff is,
Uh,
to me, is kind of pop music, but he had that
yeah.
smooth voice. And everybody knew it was Sam Cooke, like, who knew the Soul Stirrers. And toward the end of his life, he recorded A Change Is Gonna Come, which was a pivotal civil rights anthem,
Aw-
and
Awesome song.
very, very important song sociologically. And then it became a hit after he died, and that song is what he is most remembered for. I think rightfully so, is that he was using his platform to say, we've got to have some social change, and that's why I think Sam Cooke is so pivotal as a soul singer, because I think soul music came out of the church, like I said, and he's the absolute representative of came from that gospel church tradition, but then also addressed real life concerns.
Yeah.
And, soul music, I say in my book, was um, music that was sung by black adults for black adults. Like it wasn't really geared at um, teenagers, so to speak. It wasn't about getting up and dancing,
Hmm.
at least not initially. It was about grappling with like real life, like infidelity, love,
Sure.
heartbreak, social change. And, Sam Cooke kind of set the template for that in a lot of ways. And as it turned out, a lot of white people liked that music too.
Yeah.
And, a lot of that stuff crossed over and became pop hits. But I argue in the book that it really was intended for a black adult audience. And that with the exception of Motown, where Berry Gordy wanted to sell any record he could to any individual on the face of the earth and was
Yeah.
trying to be as neutral as possible. But otherwise, the soul music movement appealed to a wide audience, but was really geared toward a black audience. And it transcended because they tapped into that sort of, they would say, soul is about feeling. And so you can't help but tap into the universal human experience at some point, and it's going to appeal to, all kinds of people from all kinds of
Sure.
backgrounds.
Right.
But I do think of it as like it's adult music that deals with real subject matter. And A Change Is Gonna Come is probably one of the greatest songs ever written.
Yeah. I feel like A Change Is Gonna Come is like the flip side of the same coin as Blowing in the Wind, as far as like, social change and justice like songs.
Yeah.
Um, for sure.
Well, and Sam Cooke, I mean, literally heard Bob Dylan's Blowing in the Wind and was
Yeah.
like, hey, who's this white cat that's like speaking to our reality? Like, I got to do this. This guy's
He
speaking to it.
covered that, or he covered the times they were changing. He covered Blowing in the Wind, right? Okay.
I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I know that Dylan was a huge inspiration for him to step out and say, I need to be writing about social topics that matter.
Yeah, he does a great cover of "Blowing in the Wind." It's worth checking out.
Mm. Nice.
And do you feel the same way about blues in terms of the black music for black adults or black adult music for black adults, as far as its intentionality is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it was primarily black artists making music for a black audience,
Hmm.
and then a bunch of white people uh, like resonated with it, and then most of white America ignored the blues until the Rolling Stones like fell
Yeah.
in love with it and Eric Clapton, and then they sold it back to the white America that had ignored it to begin with.
Yeah.
Um, but the upside of that was then that people started going, hey, I love this Rolling Stone stuff. Who's Willie Dixon? Who's Muddy Waters? Who's
Yeah.
Howlin' Wolf?
Sure.
Like, let me go find out. So, I think that's a case where, soul music was like a direct line to the radio. White audiences loved it. It crossed over to pop, whereas blues like took a generation to
Had
be
to be
sold back
repackaged.
to a white audience through these British guys, which is, super interesting. Um, and I think that even that I think helped open the doors in some ways to Southern rock, because now you've got British guys going, blues music is cool, and
Sure.
blues is very much a Southern form originally that then went to Chicago and became electrified and a precursor to part of the stew that made rock and roll.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I think there's a great live record with Nina Simone where she's introducing her song to be Young, Gifted, and Black, and she basically says something to the effect of, if you're white, you can like this song, but it's not for you.
Yeah. I
Like, you're not the center of the universe. I didn't write this song with you in mind. This is me as a black artist writing this song to a black audience. Like it all you want. It's fine. It doesn't bother me. I'm glad if you like it, but
Yeah. But
but
know who
don't
it's for.
yeah, don't center yourself. And I think there's something telling in that.
There is, for sure. Yeah, it's funny the way you put it, that blues had to be repackaged and brought back. It blew my mind when I found out. It's funny, I tried to I never the Rolling Stones really never resonated with me as strongly as some other bands at that time. And I like a lot of their I like their music plenty, and I'm not trying to detract anything from their greatness, but it blew my mind when I listened to their first record. I went back to the beginning and I tried listening to some of their discography, and it was a weird. Like I never heard blues at this point in my life. This is probably 5 or 6 years
Right.
ago. I never heard any blues before. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like the Rolling Stones. And like I didn't recognize any of the songs. And then fast forward like 3 or 4 years, and now I'm much more into the blues actually again through way of the Grateful Dead, where I would hear their covers from the early '60s, late '60s, early '70s with Pigpen, and then I'd look at all these like songs, like, and then I'd look, and then again I'd find the original songs, and so I went through this whole little blues phase, and then I went back to the album, and I'm like, this whole album's just covers. I didn't realize that the Rolling
Right.
Stones are a cover band, and
Right. Right.
and they were at first.
Yeah. 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 They definitely just started out covering blues and early soul records that they liked, and that's
Yeah,
how
it's
they,
so funny,
you know,
isn't it? It's so crazy. You don't
yeah.
associate that.
I mean, I love the Rolling Stones, one of my favorite bands, but basically, like, the Rolling Stones didn't really become the Rolling Stones till like 68, you
Yeah.
know, and from like 68 into the early 70s, 73, 74, that period of like Beggar's Banquet and Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street, that stuff's just unbeatable.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And and I'm curious if you've what you know about this from a more historical or social perspective, but the Altamont fiasco, you could call her, the infamous Altamont concert, which I'm sure you'll explain just briefly, but that, or if you don't mind, but that would that have an impact on their reputation, on the way that they played music, on the way that they kind of looked at themselves? Because, like from that point, they kind of got a little bit more embracing, the good and the bad, and the devil and the and otherwise, So
Yeah.
maybe you could talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit.
I think, you know, I think Mick got really freaked out by that. And, for maybe those who don't know, Altamont was a big concert in 1969 that,
It's supposed to be
um,
the West Coast
yeah,
Woodstock.
the West Coast Woodstock, but the Hells Angels were hired to provide security,
Which they
which,
all
by
could.
the way, that came from the Grateful Dead.
Yep.
That was a Grateful Dead thing, and a guy winds up getting stabbed to death, and there was just so I know the Flying Burrito Brothers played on that show, and
The Dead were gonna play, and
um,
they left.
yeah, I did a couple of I did a Byrds book that Chris Hillman was involved in, and then I edited Chris Hillman's um, autobiography,
Cool.
and he of course was in the Byrds and Flying Burrito Brothers, and he talked about like from the time they arrived, there was like a mood. Um, there was just like he described it as like a sinister vibe in
Yeah.
the air. And you're kind of coming out of this whole summer of like the Manson murders, which
Hmm.
I think now there's just so much. There was more like shocking violence in the news this past weekend alone than people were exposed to
Yeah.
in that era, probably in like a year.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
um,
There's a lot of deaths around that time though in Laurel Canyon. There's a whole lot
yeah,
of deaths around then too.
yeah.
So yeah,
And I just remember Chris talking about like if you weren't there, you can't grasp like how this just sort of almost evil vibe was permeating, at the time. And he's like, we went up there, and he's like, from the time we arrived at Altamont, it was just like everything was like unsettled and kind of spooky. And, um, you know, basically, I think it really freaked out Mick Jagger after that happened. But it's widely considered like the end of the hippie era. You
yeah,
think of Monterey and you think of Woodstock, and it's all peace and love. And then like now you go, wait, well maybe we're not insulated from the harsh
yeah,
realities of violence. And so yeah, it was a big deal. But I remember just Chris talking to me about that, about the feeling of that day from somebody who was there, and yeah, I mean it sort of marks the end of the peace and love and all the possibilities, and it's like harsh reality comes crashing into the uh, hippie utopia in a way.
yeah. I mean, and I believe, I mean, based on the accounts that I read, and I could be wrong, but based on a couple of accounts that I read about this general point in time, Haight-Ashbury was kind of crumbling at this point in terms of everyone is kind of moving out, and people kind of went from like shrooms and LSD to more speed and heroin and
Yeah.
coke. And so like you kind of had these what would be typically called like love drugs and love scene kind of getting permeated with something a little bit more sinister. And I mean, tell anyone, try, give someone some LSD and give someone a bump of coke and see, what the difference is in terms of the outcome, And so I wonder if that was more of like, of Altamont was kind of, the first attempt of a gathering for this new crowd that had moved into the to that area.
Yeah,
Because I think what we
possible.
kind of said again that everything was kind of heading down, going downhill for San Francisco at that point.
Yeah. And you got to look at like what drugs cost what money, and then all of a sudden these like rock stars have a lot of money
Yeah,
that they never had before. Then you
yeah,
start getting into the expensive drugs,
yeah.
and then these guys like, yeah, didn't do their personalities any favors.
I just read Wonderland Avenue for the first time. My a friend of the podcast sent me the copy of the book, and the first half of the book blew my mind. I don't know if you read it before. You know what it's about what's his name? He was Jim Morrison's publicist in like high school, Danny Sugarman.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And his story. And so the first half of the book is how he was in high school even middle school, and just hanging around the door scene. And then he just started taking their mail and writing their press releases. And then the whole second half of the book is just about his full blown heroin addiction and like what that was. And again, this also coincides historically with like the exact same transition from the time period from the late 60s, from like end of 68 and then like entering the 70s, just becoming like a heroin coke kind of scene that was just so destructive to everyone around it that like
Yeah.
music literally had to just move on down somewhere else. It was crazy.
Right. Yeah.
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 Can you tell me about the Byrds a little bit? Because I love them. And
Yeah.
I think I'm more of a CSNY guy, but how'd you decide to write about them? Was that a passion project, or was that something that was recommended again by a friend or an editor? How'd that go?
No, it was my idea. As I mentioned, I edited Chris Hillman's autobiography, which is called Time Between My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. Um, I like a good long subtitle so people know what they're getting into.
Sure.
Um, and so I had worked with Chris on that, and then around the time right before the pandemic hit, um, I wanted to get into doing some like really nice coffee table books, like expensive, high end, like collector item type coffee table books. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to do a Byrds coffee table book? But you know, um, obviously the band hadn't been together in many years,
Sure.
and David Crosby did not tend to endear himself to people that he had been in bands with before, and so
That's such a polite
uh,
way of putting it.
Crosby and Roger McGuinn basically like didn't have any communication with each other. I think Chris and Crosby would like text and stuff, but it wasn't like they hung out. Like they weren't tight. And the Byrds had not done anything. Like those three guys had not done anything in years since the 90s. Like there was a box set that came out in the early 90s and they did a few new songs, but that was the last time that McGuinn and Hillman and Crosby had done anything
Yeah.
together. So I thought, well, what are the chances, of making this actually happen? And um, I basically talked to Chris and his wife Connie, who is his manager and has an amazing background herself, working with Elton John and Queen and all these,
Nice.
great artists. So um, she was basically like, well, we'll talk about it with the McGuins, and the McGuins were on board, and Chris and Roger are pretty good friends, and they had been out on tour with Marty Stuart, who's a big country artist, and they had been doing this anniversary um, series of concerts for the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album that the Byrds, their one kind of big country album that was a complete flop at the time, but it's become a cult classic. So those guys had been working together, but not with Crosby, because Crosby was out of the band at that point when they did Sweetheart. But basically, I think the only reason that the McGuins like got on board was because the Hillmans were like, yeah, we've worked with this guy, like he's okay, like and literally the McGuinn's whole thing was like our contract has to be identical to whatever contract Hillman got, because we trust that they will have negotiated a good
Sure.
contract. So I was like, yeah, no problem, that's fine with me. And then Crosby got on board, and the real reason Crosby got on board is because the pandemic was starting and he couldn't go out and tour. And, Crosby led a storied life and did not hang on to a lot of his money.
Yes.
And so,
But he spent it well.
yeah, yeah. He, speaking of expensive drugs, so he basically was like, yeah, I can't go out and tour and make a living, so a book advance sounds, good. So he signed on, and then I became the three-ring, circus master, where I would just go back and forth between these three guys
Wow.
as we put this book together. And it was wild, man. Like it was,
It's got to be the
it was,
coolest thing in the entire world, no? I mean, when you wake up, you're like, I'm so excited to do this, or like, was it? I mean, was it a dream? What was it like? Because these
I
are
mean,
it's
it was,
history you're dealing with.
yeah, yeah, it was great. I mean, basically I was like, I want to find every photo of the Byrds that was ever taken. And the book was like just 1964 to 1967, so it was just the
Sure.
original five guys. And then like Gene Clark peeled off, relatively early. Crosby was out. But by the end of 67, it was only three of the original guys that remained.
Hmm.
And so I took it up to that point. And then, of course, like Graham Parsons briefly, came in, and then Hillman left. And then like McGuinn went on for like another 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, with different configurations. But this was just the original lineup that I was dealing with. So I was dealing with I was like, I got to find every photo
Yeah.
of these guys. And I'll say I haven't seen a photo since that I
That you
didn't
haven't seen.
that I hadn't seen. And then just start going through the photos with the guys. Like, hey, what do you like? What do you not like? What do you want? And they were all pretty different in terms of, like, one of them was just like, I don't care. One of them was like, I want to see every single one. Like, it was just a different experience with each member of the group. Um, but yeah, just starting to like that's when the research becomes like I feel like a detective, where I'm trying to like find all these images and then like figure out how this is all going to fit together. And I love this sort of like puzzle part of it, where you're like, okay, we got this, we got that. How does this all going to fit together? How is it going to flow? And then just sitting down with those three guys separately and being like, let's walk through every photo. Tell me the stories that this evokes. Tell me if you remember this or if you don't, or like, whatever. So
Were
those
there
conversations.
inconsistencies in their stories? Like, did multiple people have different memories when based on a picture?
Yeah, yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
And in the book, I mean, sometimes I just have contradictory things right next to each other, because the book will have like, it's Roger's. It'll say who's speaking.
Yeah.
So the book is like an oral history. So where
Sure.
it's like Roger, Chris, David. Sometimes there'll be two memories right next to each other that completely contradict each other.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know,
Totally.
Everybody remembers something different. So I kind of like that when doing history. Like people remember things differently. So let's just put up both their memories and then,
Good for
let
you. Good
let
for you.
people
That's such
decide.
a great way. That's such a great way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's so honest. It's so cool. There's a great author. I want to say his name's James Andrew Miller, but I'm also not sure if I'm thinking of the right guy. He wrote a book called Tinderbox. He wrote a book about the CAA. He wrote about ESPN. And the way that he writes books is he essentially compiles hundreds of hours of interviews and then arranges snippets of the interviews into a coherent story, similar to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And and so like you'll have, for example, like with the HBO book, you'll be like two guys talking about the same deal, and they're two
Yeah.
ends of the story. And it's like, it was the best fucking deal I ever made in my entire life. Another guy's like, I never should have made that fucking deal. It was the end of my career, you know? And so, I mean, I love that. I think that embracing that kind of multi narrative is tons of
Yeah.
fun. How do you
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I remember when I was doing the Southern Rock book, having an instance where Ed King from Leonard Skinner had gone through this whole like very specific memory of how one particular song came together in the studio, and Al Cooper, who was their producer,
Mhm.
also famous for playing the organ on Like a Rolling Stone and a bunch of other Dylan
Yes, that's
stuff.
right.
One of the great characters of rock and roll history. But Al Cooper produced that Leonard Skinner record, and I interviewed him, and he was an interesting guy. I don't think he really wanted to do an interview, so he told me he would do it at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Really? Al
Yeah,
Cooper.
yeah.
Okay.
So, but little did he know that he lived in New York and I lived in LA. So I'm like, 3 o'clock's midnight for me, so it's not that bad.
So funny.
Um, so, so I called his bluff and we did it at 3 in the morning.
No way.
Um,
What was it like? You
and
called him?
yeah, so I called him and we talked, but he had this thing of like he wanted to see the chapter before he'd agree to let me publish it, which I wouldn't do that today, but this is my first book, and I said okay. So I
Okay.
sent him the chapter, and he disagreed with what Ed King had said about how the session went, and I had both of their remembrances like
Their
in
accounts. Yeah.
subsequent paragraphs, like next to you, like every man got his say,
Yeah.
you know. And Al was like, well, the way I remember it is right. That's what happened. So you can't put what Ed said. And I'm like, well, but it's clearly attributed to Ed. It's not me saying this is how it happened. Ed says how he remembers it. You say how you remember it. Everyone. And he was really like, he
Yeah.
had a, I had to really fight him on that. Like he was, and I'm like, look, dude, like, what if I talk to Ed? And he said, I got to take yours out. Like,
Yeah.
the only fair thing to do is let you both have your memories here. So I've always kind of followed that ever since of like, if it contradicts, put them both,
Yeah.
you
That's
know?
awesome. That's a great story too. What a character, dude. What a character. What'd you think of the Dylan movie? The what do you call it? The new one with Timothy Chalamet, A Complete Unknown.
Yeah. Yeah, Complete Unknown. I liked it. I thought, um, like, this is where, as a music historian,
Yeah.
I have to like shut off a part of my brain
Yeah.
because a dramatic film is not a documentary. And I'm the guy that's gonna like elbow my wife and be like, that song didn't even come out till 2 years after this is supposed to be. And it's like no
Oh,
one
really?
cares.
There was that kind of inconsistencies in it?
Yeah, I mean, you have stuff like that in any biopic,
Sure. Yeah.
like and so I'm the guy that has to like go in and be like, okay, don't be annoying, like turn off that part of your brain. Same with the Springsteen
I didn't
film
watch it
that came
yet.
out.
What'd you think of it?
I liked it. I liked
Liked
it.
it?
Um, Ultimately, it's like a pretty good film about mental health.
Right.
And if you go into it as I'm looking for a ironclad documentary of Bruce Springsteen, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're like, I'm interested in the human story, it's
Yeah.
good.
It's a good story.
I thought that Timothy Chalamet, his portrayal of Dylan was so good.
I thought it was incredible. I thought it was
Yeah.
so. I thought even the hand thing and the little nuances he got were very solid.
There's a scene where he goes, I think he's gone to visit Joan Baez in some hotel room. And there's a scene where he's standing in the doorway and the light is behind him so that he's like a silhouette.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, this guy, the way he's holding himself
Yeah.
as a silhouette is exactly like Dylan. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I thought that his portrayal was great. And I thought Jeremy Allen White did a good job as Bruce too. It's just that I had seen too much of the bear to ever like
Ah.
forget that it was him.
Yeah.
He didn't get lost in being Springsteen,
I,
you know.
I didn't watch The Bear yet, so I don't have that problem. I'll make sure to watch
Yeah, yeah,
Monkey from Nowhere first.
yeah,
That was that's been a secret ambition of mine is to write I've worked for years, a little bit at a time on a Springsteen script
mm,
because I mean I love his story, man. I love the
yeah,
story of the kid that didn't have anything and then, you know, and just the one track focus on,
yeah,
on just performing and just bringing it to life. And you could
yeah,
see like in every single performance, it was like a complete expression of mental. It was like a full emotional roller coaster every single show. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you're crying when he's talking about his dad, and he's an incredible storyteller, and he takes his time, and
Right.
the tempo changes so dramatically. You know, like
Yeah.
even within the songs, it's so much fun. And
Yeah.
hearing little stories like that they used to open for like the Allman Brothers or something like that are always also fun tidbits that
Yeah.
to come across.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I loved his one man show where he got up and like admitted to all the self mythologizing that he
Never did.
did, and like you still kind of love him for it anyway.
Yeah.
It's like is something about him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because he's honest. He's honest and he's frank. And I think that it's funny. I had a poetry teacher from the same, from Elizabeth, New Jersey, that also had that same kind of like blue collar background with just like this incredible descriptive poetry for the plainness and ruggedness and weariness of life that and with
Yeah.
that humor like just really like there's something about that I think that like Jersey grind from that time that was really
Yeah.
that lent itself to that kind of creativity. Really cool.
Yeah, and I also believe just from like, being a music nerd that there are people like Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Joni Mitchell. These people are just chosen. And they get to be the recipients of some kind of cosmic flow
Yeah.
that um, they can't help. I think Willie Nelson, I would put him in that category. Um, and no matter how hard somebody sets out to work to try to become like that, you can seek inspiration from these people, but you can't become those people unless you were chosen.
Yeah.
Like I think, and I think like a Jesse Wells, to come back to somebody that we were talking about
You think
that's
he's
more.
like that?
I think he's kind of like that, and I think it's just like, it's really unfair for the people who like long to be that so badly. I just don't think you can make yourself into that. You can make yourself better. Like writing songs and recording songs and playing an instrument, there's undoubtedly craftsmanship
Sure.
involved. And if somebody has that spark and they never hone it, they don't work on it, then it's never going to go anywhere. But you have to, if you're going to
There's something deep you
really,
guys tap into.
yeah, if you're really going to like work on that craft and become the greatest, you also got to just be one of those chosen people that, and I think that the true icons, the Paul McCartneys of the world, there's just something, there's some spiritual reality that I don't claim to understand that just is. And,
Yeah.
I don't think somebody can will themselves into being that.
And you know what's interesting? I even think that it could strike you for longer or shorter periods of time because,
Yeah.
I mean, I've like there's a great book I read called Astral Weeks about '68 Boston. That's how I actually knew about the James Brown comment earlier.
Yeah.
But it was about and about Van Morrison making Astral Weeks, and and by his and like or you have I took my wife a couple years ago to see John Fogerty. I mean, Creedence had a million hits in 2 years, and then and then it kind of you got the taking the ballpark song, but like there's certain people that they kind of like you see flashes of it for a couple of years, and then a couple of albums, then it just Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, one magic album, one and a
Yeah.
half, or Meatloaf. So it's cool. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a window for some people. And ultimately, I think maybe those are the people who, you know, you contrast that with a Neil Young or a Bob Dylan or a Bruce Springsteen that have just been doing it at a high level for decades and decades
Yeah,
and
it's a
decades. And
lifelong
those are the
trip.
ones that I think are the chosen ones. And I think John Fogerty's amazing. He's a genius. And, there's certain artists, but when there's that window, um, yeah, I mean, you got to appreciate the window for what it is. It's like, oh, it's incredibly fruitful, but there's
Can you
very few
imagine
artists that
ending
were.
like looking out my back door and then never being able to do it again, and you'd be like, "What the hell?" Like I don't understand.
Right.
Before
But I mean, I think what's even more crazy than that is like, how am I still interested to hear what Bruce Springsteen's next album is going to be?
Yeah,
That's even more remarkable
yeah.
that there are people where the window like never closes. There's very few,
What do you think of his last few albums? Chasing Wild Horses and then the Soul one, the Soul cover one.
The soul cover one didn't interest me very much. I'm like, you're not going to improve on these. You know, but I mean, I love all of his records. You know, my favorite Bruce is acoustic Bruce, which is probably not the
Yeah,
most like
sure.
popular thing in the world, but Nebraska's my favorite Bruce album. Goes to Tom Joad is up there as
Hmm.
well. Um, I've seen Bruce perform just him and an acoustic guitar, which is my favorite way
Yeah.
to see him.
There was only a
Um,
couple he only did a couple of those tours, right? Like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I saw him in like 96 or
Yeah.
97, somewhere in there, doing
Yeah.
that
Right around
small, like
Love era.
2,000 seat venue, all acoustic show. Because, I mean, and look, I just saw Bruce on this last tour here,
Yeah.
in LA, and I couldn't believe how good it was.
That was
Like
awesome.
the energy level. They came out and they kicked off the show with Open All Night,
Nice.
and with like a full horn section,
Hmm.
and the energy was off the charts. I'm like, this guy is like well into his 70s,
Yeah.
and I could not have done that show,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it went for, of course, like I had to get up and go pee. How did Bruce not have to go pee?
Sure.
He's, this old guy.
Yeah, I don't know.
um, but I mean, so like I love the electrifying energy of the E Street Band, but my favorite Bruce is acoustic Bruce because he's a great lyricist and you can really like marinate. And I love when he, does a song like Born to Run acoustic.
Yeah, those are
Um,
great.
you know,
Growing up is such a and he always has that story there. I
yeah.
I had tickets. I I'm not exaggerating. I was single. I was an idiot, and I didn't care about I was saving money at that point, and I bought two tickets to his Broadway show for $1,000,
Wow.
and I couldn't make it. I work with my dad. And I had to go and we had to go on a work trip. And I was like, you know what? Like this guy is giving me everything in the freaking world. I'll give him the stupid tickets and I'll go on the trip instead, right? And so I gave him the tickets, and the entire night he's texting me, "This is the best thing I've ever seen." And then the next day he calls me, he goes, "I'm still high from that show. That was incredible." And I got to take my wife to. So we live in South Florida. He was playing in Orlando, in Tampa, to open the first tour since before COVID. And so we went to that show, and like 2 days later he was playing Orlando, and it was so great. I was like, "I know you don't have to come if you don't want to come. I'm going to Orlando. I'm going to Orlando today. I'll come back tonight, but like I got to catch that show. It was too good to miss out." Anyway,
That's
um, Scott, I really appreciate the time. This is so much fun, and you are a wealth of fun and cool information. So thank you so much for the time and for the great stories. And this is really great. I hope to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where
Thanks for
can people
having me.
find your work in case anyone wants to look you up?
You can go to scottbbomar.com. That's Scott, just like you think, B, and then Bomar, Bomar, scottbbomar.com. That's my online home for all the various things I do, including my Songcraft Spotlight on Songwriters podcast. But that's where you can find all my books and some articles and, find out more about how to read some of the music nerd stuff that I love to write. And don't go to scottbomar.com because there's another guy named Scott Bomar. Got to be Scott B. Bomar. I listened to your episode with Sean Levy.
There you go.
And there's two Sean Levys. There's also two Scott Bomars. And the other Scott Bomar, who is a great guy and super nice, he lives in Memphis, but he scores films.
Oh,
And
sweet. Maybe I'll talk to him
I
then
always
also.
I always know when he's got a new film coming out because I start getting texts from people, and then when I have a new book come out, he like starts texting me going, "Oh, okay, so everybody's congratulating me on your new book." And so anyway, he did the music for Song Sung Blue, this Hugh Jackman film that's coming out, I
Oh,
think, on
nice.
Christmas Day. And so I've already, because I live in LA, I've already had some people who've been to screeners and are like, "Hey man, congrats! I didn't know you did but he did like Hustle and Flow and like a bunch of films with Craig Brewer. And so yeah, I always know when he's got a new one because people go, "Hey, I was watching such and such." I'm like, "Wasn't me." Uh, but yeah, so
Any press is
Scott
good
Beadle.
press. Any attention is good
Yeah,
attention,
exactly,
right?
exactly, exactly.
Beautiful. Scott, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.